Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Williamsburg City Council meeting of February the 11th. Ms. Felica, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers. Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Pons.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Maslin.
Here. Thank you. Hadn't heard from Mr. Rogers, so perhaps he's just delayed getting on this afternoon. Next item on the agenda is council minutes. You all have had the opportunity to review them.
Yes.
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve?
Did we make those two edits, Sandy?
Yes, sir, I did.
So
Go ahead.
Ted,
Yeah, I move to approve the city council session meeting minutes for January 11th and city council business meeting minutes for January 14th as edited.
second.
Mr. Rogers. Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
It looks like we have Mr. Rogers joined us. Welcome.
Sorry about that, y'all. Had some technical difficulties.
Okay, so that takes us now to reports. First, we have the monthly financial statements. Ms. Downing?
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of City Council. I want to start today's report with a COVID update, which discusses the performance of the general fund. And I will share my screen and bring up that report. Okay, so the real estate tax is ahead of the projection by $575,000, and it's $148,000 ahead of the collections as of January 2020. Personal property tax is $1.2 million ahead of the projection for January, and $149,000 increase compared to the collections of January 2020. Our lodging tax is $466,000 below the projection and almost $1.2 million or 61% less than collections last year at this time. Our meals tax is $138,000 ahead of the projection for January, but $1.3 million or about 33% less than the collections last year at this time. Business and professional and occupational license, which isn't due until March, is ahead of the January projection by $98,000. Sales tax for education is $344,000 ahead of the projection and $48,000 more than last year this time. Then I come to the portion of CARES funding that was passed through to the schools from the city. I just pulled that out of the variance, other revenue variants, to better clearly see the impact, because we didn't have that budgeted and it wasn't included in our projection. So to see the variance in other revenues. And other revenues were ahead of projection by $324,000 compared to last year. And the other revenue category includes everything that's not listed individually, which are items such as revenue from permits, as well as charges for fees. An example of that would be charges for parks and rec fees or athletics, that type of thing. And then our expenditures, our total expenditures are more than projected for January by $405,000. And this is largely due to some timing differences. So at the end of the day, you can see that we budgeted for a deficit of $7 million. And we projected by this point in the year, our deficit would be about $5.9 million. So although we're $2.1 million ahead of our projection, we're still looking at about a $3.8 million deficit before any of the planned transfers from sales tax or tourism fund. I would like to have a few brief comments about some of the other funds included in your report. In the sales tax fund, sales tax is trending about 21.5% less than last year. So that's about $490,000. And in the tourism fund, sales tax is trending about 26% less, and that equates to $281,000. The $2 lodging tax is trending 51% less than January of 2020, and that's about $301,000. In the utility fund, our water revenue is operating at 34% of budgeted revenues as of January 2021, compared to revenues recognized in January of 2020 of 46% of budget. Dollar-wise, that's about a $461,000 decrease compared year to year. Our consumptions decreased in water about 15% compared to the previous year. Sewer revenue is operating at 36% of budget compared to 38% of budget last year this time. Sewer consumption has decreased about 3.5% compared to last year. And dollar-wise, it's about a decrease of $109,000. Total utility revenues are at 40% of budget compared to 47% that was budgeted last year. And that's a difference of about $490,000 for total revenues. The utility expenses are at 39% of budget compared to 38% of budget expended in January of 2020. And that makes the expenditure level about, or expenses about level with the prior year. And then finally, I'd like to draw your attention to the city's cash balances, and that's on page 10 of your report. The city's cash balances, after I adjust them for the bond funds that are in escrow, because we're restricted to how we spend those, have decreased about $7.8 million or 19.6% compared to 1 year ago. Now, we're still able to meet our obligations even with that decrease, but the reason I want to point it out is because we often discuss the importance of our reserve as it relates to our credit rating and thereby our interest costs when we do feel the need to borrow for larger projects. And we also talk about using that reserve during downturns of the economy. But it's also important to note that our revenue streams don't come in level through the year. And we also use the reserves during the year in between some of the large influx of revenue. So an example of that would be the upcoming tax collection in June, as well as the B-poll that's due in March. We continue to watch that. I keep my eye on that very closely, but we're still in good shape. I just wanted to point out that we have experienced a decrease. And I'll also note that attached to your report is a sales tax report from the Commissioner of Revenue's office. And that concludes my comments. Be glad to entertain any questions.
Mayor Pons, I think you might be muted.
Thank you. Words of 2021, you're muted. Barbara, I was just complimenting you on your stewardship with these funds and appreciate you bringing some of these items, important items to awareness. Clearly, we are not out of the woods and we've got a long way to go. And the uncertainty of the next fiscal year and rebounding of tourism is weighing on us all heavily. I did see the new report from the Commissioner of Revenue's office, and I appreciate getting that. And I look forward to understanding it better. But is this something that will be coming every month?
Yes, we anticipate having that every month.
Good, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Dameron?
Yeah, I had just one question and comment. Thanks again, Ms. Dameron, for, I know each month of putting this together, and I know every month I say this, and while there's some positives in there, keeping in mind that this was a worst case scenario, it is weighing heavily on all of us and going to have some impact for a very long time. Either maybe you or Mr. Trivett, are there any additional expenses that the city's incurring with operating the vaccination clinic?
That's a great question, Vice Mayor. Yes, there are expenses, certainly staffing expenses, equipment expenses, a whole host of things. The city has bought laptops and chairs and various items. Luckily, we are still in a state of emergency. I know it's easy to forget that because normally, our state of emergencies are 2 or 3 days to deal with a hurricane and then it's over. And this one has now gone on for nearly a year. So a lot of those expenses are eligible for reimbursement through FEMA's process. And we are tracking expenses so that we can report those and seek reimbursement. A lot of the expenses recently having to do with standing up the clinic at the Colonial Williamsburg Visitor Center, we asked for pre-approval through FEMA, which is not a guarantee that we'll be reimbursed, but it certainly makes us feel better that we will. So we're optimistic the majority of the expenses we're incurring are going to be reimbursed.
Good. Well, I appreciate everyone's diligence to make sure that we have the opportunity to be reimbursed from FEMA. So thank you.
And just to build on that, some of those expenses that are incurred by Colonial Williamsburg, the electricity and things, those will be included in potential reimbursements from FEMA.
That's right. We have Chris Shelton prepared an agreement for us with Colonial Williamsburg that entitles them to be compensated for our use of their facility.
Great. Thank you. Caleb, I think I saw, or Mr. Rogers, I saw your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. I do have a quick question. Barbara, thank you as always for putting this report together for us. I think Vice Mayor Dent's point is an important one, that even though we are seeing some above the adjusted budget numbers, that it's still a worst case scenario. So on that topic, I was curious about the movement of these numbers over time, and if any have really shown to be important to highlight from your perspective. And I ask because I noticed lodging was almost $100,000 more below the projected budget than it was last month when we looked at it. So are there others that you think are important to note as we've now had almost a full year of looking at where we are in comparison to the adjusted budget?
Well, I think the important thing to note that the comparing to a projection does have some cash flow differences, because when you make that projection, you're looking at how you normally spend money throughout the year. So there's that. But I think the main point is that in our tourism and even our meals tax that shows a positive variance to the projection, when you compare to where we were last year, we're still talking about like $1.3 million difference. So the projections are based on how we budgeted 21, but it's important to note how much we budgeted below, but how much we're really missing in revenue compared to a normal year.
I think the other thing to note is that while our projections are holding true in terms of worst case scenario, we had anticipated that the revenues would be well into recovery by now. So if you remember when we presented our COVID-19 budgeting scenarios, it was based on the pandemic largely being behind us in the fall. And certainly we're not there yet. The most recent data shows that it could be the summer before we achieve what's called herd immunity, and that's in a best case scenario. Fingers crossed that happens, because we really need revenues to start recovering so that we can see how that's going to impact the 23 budget more clearly.
Mr. Maslin?
Yeah, following up Caleb's point, Barbara, I think when we're reading those columns for the month, we're reading year-to-date figures, correct?
Yes, it is year to date.
So what might be helpful is to understand maybe trending. So in other words, over the last 6 months or so, the percent lower than what we saw last year for each month, to just see if the trending's going in the positive direction or negative direction. Would that be a good idea?
We can certainly show that. Again, I think, as Drew pointed out, when we built our budget and we built the projection, we assumed that we would gradually increase, and that has not happened. We've not started that recovery process, but I certainly will be glad to pull that together maybe for the next report.
Well, that's good. And
Some
quick
of
question,
and how the projection and how the typical cash flow plays into it.
right, thank you. Quick question on what you were talking about in terms of utility revenue and the deficit there. Do you have visibility in terms of how much of that is because of reduced usage versus increased delinquency?
I will. We just went live on a new system, so I was hoping I would get that report before today's report on the age trial balance. I should have that. If it hasn't come in while I'm speaking, I should have that soon. So yes, I will be able to look at that in terms of how much is related to reduced consumption and how much is related to slower collections.
Okay, thank you.
So just in looking at the monthly financials, just kind of adding up, I mentioned it last month during the same conversation. Back of the napkin, it's about $100 million loss in revenue to hotels and restaurants, meaning that compared to the same period last year, that's the variance that our businesses haven't been able to earn, which is a challenge in its own right in terms of repairs and maintenance, capital outlays, and employment, deferring maintenance on these businesses. So I know we all aspire for this to get behind us as soon as we can. So, all right. Any other comments on that? Hearing none, I'll move forward to monthly departmental operating reports.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So we have submitted the reports for your review. Happy to answer any questions. I did want to take just a minute, though, and since we have Chief Eagle on with us today, talk a little bit about where we are in terms of the vaccination effort, and hopefully give a little bit of an update on the operation of the Greater Williamsburg Vaccination Clinic. Chief? You're on mute, Chief.
Can you hear me now?
You can.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to announce that our Greater Williamsburg Vaccination Clinic at the Colonial Williamsburg Visitor Center has vaccinated nearly 3,500 people since we started. This clinic is really through a lot of hard work through Mr. Trivet and his relationship with Cliff Fleet and working with them to allow us to operate a clinic there. Our largest day thus far has been 1,150 people. We have recently expanded the capability of the clinic to allow us to do up to 3,500 people a day, or up to 3,000 people a day, provided we have the vaccine and the vaccinators to do so. So we've expanded it to give us the best options moving forward. All of that is dependent currently on the availability of vaccine. Tomorrow, we are going to be doing 710 vaccinations, and it will be the first time that we will be utilizing VDH's robust scheduling program, which is called PrepMod, which is a program that's being utilized throughout the state. So tomorrow will be 100% scheduled through VDH. If people want to get, right now they are utilizing pre-registration contact lists that have been, that VDH has been collecting. If someone wants to get on that list, they can go to VDH's website, vdh.virginia.gov/peninsula, which is the Peninsula version, or part of their website, and you can go through a series of questions and get on a pre-registration list, and then they will be reaching out to schedule appointments over the next several weeks. Currently, vaccinations are being given through a partnership of Williamsburg Fire Department paramedics, as well as school nurses who are working through the Reserve Medical Corps, as well as paramedics through James City County Fire Department. Our office and administrative staff has been a collection of people from the Williamsburg James City County Library, as well as people throughout our government who have graciously volunteered to work in various aspects of the clinic, whether it be greeters, people directing traffic, people directing people to the open vaccination station, or people taking registration. And then we've been utilizing EMTs from both our fire department and James City County's fire department to do the monitoring to make sure that people are not having an adverse reaction to the vaccination. Currently, we've only done Moderna. We do have the capability now with a partnership through William and Mary. We have the super cold storage on site through our relationship with William and Mary, who has loaned the super cold freezer to us. It's in place at the site. Currently, we have our local hospital systems have done all our 1A employees, and we've been concentrating on 1B employees, the majority of which have been teachers in the area. I think we've completed almost all of the teacher groups, and we've also done vaccinated other 1B classification folks that live and work in the area. We do know that CVS is rolling out a limited number of vaccine spots. At this time, we only know of 2 CVSs that are doing that on the peninsula. One of those is in the Croker area of James City County, and the other one, I believe, is down in Newport News. Those 2 CVSs are able to do 100 vaccinations a day, and I believe they are scheduling their own vaccinations, is my understanding of that. With that, is there any questions that I can answer regarding our vaccination? I will say that currently we are scheduled for Wednesdays and Fridays over the next couple weeks. Wednesday being 500 new doses, and Friday being some new doses as well as second doses for the ones that we've already given. With our largest day currently planned is February 26th with 1,800 doses scheduled, over 1,800. And currently, it's by appointment, and it's everything from now moving forward will be scheduled by VDH through their pre-registration that they have available on their website. Any questions that I may answer?
Oh,
Go ahead, Barb, or Ms. Ramsey.
so Chief Eagle, so when you say that it's through VDH's scheduling system and the registration, any idea how that's being done? Will they sort through for the oldest or locality, or because I don't think you include any like underlying health conditions on registration form.
So I do know that the amount of vaccine that comes to each health district is based on population. I do know that when you go in to do your pre-registration, they do ask for an age. They're doing, I do know that there's a series of questions in their pre-registration dealing with age, dealing with underlying conditions, and you have to select that on their pre-designation, and you also select the clinic that you would like to be put on the list for. So when you get to the Peninsula Health District's website, you can go into that link and you can answer their series of questions, and it'll allow you to select whether you want to be in the Greater Williamsburg Clinic, the Hampton Clinic, the Newport News Clinic, and there's also one down in Yorktown. You can select that clinic, you can put in your age, or you can list that you have underlying conditions. And but I do not know how they select through that and determine what order those people will go in.
So, Ms. Ramsey, this morning, the CAOs had a discussion with the local Peninsula Health District Director, and that was one of the questions that we asked, because obviously that's a question that we get quite often from people who have pre-registered. So if you'll just indulge me for a second, I'd like to explain the process a little bit, because I do think it is confusing for folks. Pre-registration is the process of signing up through the VDH website, right? And you don't get an appointment time. You get very little information back, in fact. But you do fill out all that information that the chief just explained. And then that is stored in a record. At this moment, they have around 13,000 pre-registration candidates. When they are selected to register, they receive a link by email to use the Prep Mod system online to actually schedule their appointment for the vaccination day, right? So that's an important distinction that I think the public really isn't fully understanding, because the Department of Health continues to say pre-registration and registration, and I think people are hearing that as the same thing, and they are not the same thing. And so one of the major complaints that we get is, I pre-registered and I've not heard anything for weeks. And that absolutely is the case, because with so few doses and so many people pre-registered, obviously it's a very small number that gets selected to then go forward to the next clinic and register through PrepMod. So your question was, how does the Department of Health select the people who would come off the pre-registration list and move to registration? And the answer to that question that we received this morning was, it's entirely age-based. So they have a time stamp for when you pre-registered, and then they look at age. So it's entirely possible that someone who is 80 signed up after someone who is 75, and yet the 80-year-old person will get selected to register for the next clinic before the 75-year-old. Now, that's what we were told this morning. As you can imagine, that's not something that's done, electronically or with computer assistance. That's a hand person reviewing the record, doing that work. So it's understandable that people are frustrated with not being able to know their status on a list, as well as really getting updates frequently on, am I on the list, and when might I get my chance to be vaccinated? I think, we heard yesterday from Dr. Avula, who is the state person in charge of the vaccination effort now for the governor, and he made it very clear, and I think it's important for all of us to just continue to reiterate, with the volume of vaccine that the state is receiving right now, it's going to take us months to satisfy the list of 1B candidates, which is equivalent to half the population of the state of Virginia. So this is not a small task. It's not going to happen quickly. And unless vaccine can become more readily available, it's going to take a very long time. So we just ask for everybody to be patient. I think the Department of Health is doing all that they can to make this go faster. The City of Williamsburg, in partnership with William and Mary, Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and James City County, are certainly doing all we can to make sure that the Department of Health can succeed. I think the important distinction for tomorrow's clinic and the clinics moving forward is that the scheduling is no longer being done by the local government. It's now being done by the Department of Health. And so all the questions about how are people being selected are being answered through conversations with the Department of Health. So it is a little bit secondhand, if you will, in terms of what the selection criteria is.
So I have one more question. So I know a lot of people registered with VDH, but then subsequently got called to get vaccinated through Centera or the school systems or things like that. So is there any way for them to drop off the VDH list? Or do you, if you're one of those individuals and you get contacted to register, you just don't register for the vaccine?
Well, so I'll answer that two ways. The vaccination process obviously is complex, even to the public, it's complex. But behind the scenes, it's twice as complex as what you're seeing. It's sort of like an iceberg. You can only see what's above the surface of the water. In the background, what's happening is there's a record that's inputted into a statewide system that tracks every vaccination that's given, regardless of where it's given. And so what the Department of Health is doing, because these various scheduling systems, the chief spoke about CVS, don't communicate with each other. So if you register with CVS, it doesn't take you off the list or share your information with the Department of Health system. And that's why when you call and ask, how can I sign up? You're probably going to be directed to 3 different places to sign up. And you should absolutely take the first opportunity to be vaccinated. And what will happen automatically in the background is the Department of Health will receive the record that you were vaccinated and take you off of their list. Doesn't mean it's a foolproof system. You may still get an email to schedule your vaccination appointment. And if you do, please don't sign up. When it comes time to get your second dose, you'll be alerted by the clinic that you received that first dose at. So there's no advantage to showing up for a second first dose appointment.
And I have one more question, if I may. This was asked to me by someone who received their dose at the vaccination clinic as an employee of William & Mary. And the question was, would they be contacted by the clinic or contacted by their employer for scheduling of the second dose?
Right. So at this moment, there's not a clear answer to that. I can tell you that we're still in discussion with the Department of Health about how we will administer the second doses. One of the common questions that we're asked is, I got my first dose several weeks ago. I'm coming up on my 28th day. When will I find out about my second dose? And the answer is that we have worked diligently to confirm with the Department of Health that when we receive our 710 doses that we're receiving this week, or the 500 doses that we're expected to get next week, that they will be sending us additional doses for the second dose administration. We are in discussions with the Peninsula Health District about how we will schedule those second doses. I can tell you that I have advocated for the Department of Health to allow the local governments to do the scheduling for those second doses, only because I think that since we scheduled them for the first dose using our system, that it'll be much easier for us to do that. Now, our system used sort of a hybrid approach of the clinic contacting people, but mostly we contacted people through their employer. And so we did do a large number of 65 and older William & Mary employees, and those people would likely be contacted through William & Mary again about their second dose appointment. Now, one thing that I would like to say, and again, this is an important point to get out because I think this is another thing that people are confused about. You cannot have your second dose until you're outside that 28-day window from the first dose. That does not mean that you have to have that second dose on the 28th day. So it could take you some time to get scheduled for the second dose, and it will not impact the efficacy of the overall vaccination program. So we don't want people to start to worry if they get within a week of that 28th day and they've not had their appointment scheduled yet. We do think that the people that were scheduled at our clinic will likely get their second dose very close to that 28th day. But I want the public at large to know that as we move further into the vaccination program, second doses may get stretched out a little longer than 28 days, and that's okay.
Mr. Maslin?
Yeah. Hey, thanks for all the work you're doing. I think most people don't, especially in the public, don't realize all the effort going into this behind the scenes. But two questions. Number one, we know that some people don't have email addresses, and we know that the state is, I guess, increasing the capacity of their call-in center. How are we recommending the people that only have phones what they should do to register? And then the second question is, part of one of the Hampton Roads cities that was doing mass vaccinations, and they had a big problem with too many people showing up because people were forwarding their link.
Right.
And then they had to go through a process of making sure, lining up, is this the right person at Appoint? Are you thinking that you're going to have that challenge at the center once it's open to the public?
So I'll take some of those questions. First of all, thank you. It is a lot of work to make sure that the cogs keep turning in the right direction. And, the number of people on our staff that are dedicated to this is quite large. And the amount of time that we're spending focused on it is dominant. The second part of that was, what do people do that don't have an email address? And that's a great question, because the VDH system right now requires you to have an email address. In fact, that's the only way that they have of contacting you at the moment, is through email. And so the CAOs of local governments on the peninsula have asked that question. We obviously have populations that either don't have an email address or have limited access to a shared computer, say at the library, where they might miss their appointment notification, particularly given the fact that it comes pretty proximate to your appointment date. The state, I believe, will be announcing within the next week that they are upstaffing their call center. And one of the reasons they're doing that is to handle people calling in to schedule appointments. So I think that will help. The city of Williamsburg, when we kicked off our vaccination clinic, we also recognized that there would be a tremendous volume of people out there that needed to have questions answered, that don't have access to the internet, or simply want to talk to a person. And so we asked if Colonial Williamsburg would loan us not only the visitor center, but also their call center, which they normally handle reservation traffic through. And those personnel have been given an FAQ and standard answers to questions. And it is our plan to secure access for that call center to also make appointments. Now, one of the reasons that that's important to us is because the local governments are uniquely equipped to deal with mass notifications. People who've lived in Williamsburg for a long time are familiar with the Everbridge program, where the velvety tones of Vice Mayor Dent alert you to impending danger. And so I think that, if we get to the point where we're able to make those appointments through the local government systems, we could use Everbridge to alert people that their appointment date is coming up. Have you signed up? Do you need any assistance? So we're really optimistic that we're going to be able to get better access to the Department of Health data so that we can improve the service of this overall program.
Mr. Dent?
So Mr. Trevor, just so I was clear on the information you provided this morning, the doses being allocated to CVS is not impacting the doses that are provided to the Williamsburg vaccination clinic. Is that correct?
That's right. So the CVS program, the CVS program is federally authorized, and they are vaccinating 65 and older only. And they are receiving a special allocation through the state, but from the federal government directly, to make sure that those clinics operate. That's one of the reasons why they're only able to do 100 vaccines a day at each one of those store sites. I may get these numbers not exactly right, but I believe that the federal allocation for the CVS program to the state of Virginia is 25,000 doses a week. And the state's allocation, separate from that, is currently 130,000 doses, and that's per week for the entire state. So you can see why it feels like this is moving very slowly. And it's because there's just not enough vaccine to really make a dent in the population that needs to be vaccinated in 1B.
And I think those are important numbers for the public to hear, to really demonstrate why it seems to be moving so slow. And then just one other quick question is, the chief stated you're getting assistance from the school nurses. Will the staffing at the clinic be impacted with the schools returning next week?
There will be some. It shouldn't impact the ability of the clinic to do to vaccinate the number of vaccines that we have and the people scheduled. But we will have some of those school nurses returning to their schools. And so we're talking with them to see if we can supplement some of them back into the clinic on certain times, as well as up the number of paramedics that are giving the vaccine.
And again, just thanks to everyone for all the work that's being done. And I know to the public, as you mentioned, Mr. Trivett, it seems like it's a slow process, but I know that everything's being done that could possibly be done with the number of vaccines that were provided. So I really do appreciate it, all the work that's being done by everyone.
Yeah. And I would echo that, for us to have stood up our own clinic in advance of, what was happening in the overall peninsula, the efforts that you all have made in partnership with CW and the college and James City County to make this happen for our residents was no easy feat. And so I think it's one that we should all be grateful for, and maybe extend a little bit of patience, understanding that we are limited not by our efforts, but by the available dosages. And so I hope that resonates throughout the community. I think our local government entities have done everything possible and beyond to make sure that we are in this position today to administer these dosages. Moving forward, I would imagine with Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, I can't even say it, as they come forward, those are single dosage shots. Those will certainly help make this process a whole lot easier. Are you aware of any timeline as to when we might expect that, the single dosage?
I'm not, Mayor. We've not had a lot of conversation about new vaccines entering the market.
Yeah, good. Any other comments, questions?
Only just to reiterate what everyone else has said about deep gratitude to city staff and everyone that's worked so hard to get us where we are, and who I know will continue working to get us further along the path of vaccination. So thank you.
I certainly echo the same. Thank you all very much, and to your teams as well.
That takes us to city manager reports. Mr. Trivett.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. We wanted to talk just a little bit about, have sort of an informal conversation about a topic that has been important to us as we sat down and did the GIOs, and also as a component of our racial equity efforts. So one of the things that we think is important is to continue to evolve our police management structure. And so the chief has decided to implement a chief's advisory panel, or committee, if you will, to help oversee the department and advise him on policy issues and other aspects of fighting crime in Williamsburg. So what we thought we'd do today, just during the city manager report, is allow the chief a few minutes to go over some of the bare bones of the policy that he's considering, and then bring that back to council again next month in a more robust report that we will do during the work session that includes some of your comments today and also the evolving thought of the department. Now, one thing I do want to make clear about this is a little different, because this will be a policy of the department, which means it's not a policy that needs to be approved by the city council. But we wanted to have some conversation with you to make sure what we're putting in place closely matches what your vision is for the body. So when we come back next month, again, it will not be for city council's approval, but just to make sure we're still on that same track of moving in the right direction. And if we are, then the idea would be that shortly thereafter, the report next month, the chief would be in a position to make that policy, to implement that policy in the department. Chief?
Well, thank you very much. And good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of council. I appreciate you all for affording us a few minutes to talk about this. It is a very important topic for us. As Mr. Trivett alluded, we're terming this the Police Chiefs Advisory Committee. We think that's an appropriate starting point for us. Some of the rough highlights of the process to date. We're thinking this will give us an opportunity to provide a forum for enhanced community involvement. Of course, that's extremely important to us, and that's really is the fabric of what we've been about. But we certainly think that this will give us a chance to enhance that. Intended to reinforce the shared values of our community and the police department, as well as enhance the quality of police services to our community. We certainly believe this will serve as a resource to aid the department in the adoption of best practices and strategies to promote 21st century policing, as well as enhanced police community relations. And the committee will not investigate complaints, but will be updated at quarterly meetings on personnel issues. My hope is that we have a broad cross-section with a lot of diverse minds in the room. And so in addition to tackling those types of reform type law enforcement issues that you may hear a lot about, we also hope that we have some expertise to help us to maybe better solve some of the old problems. I mean, just the hiring, retention, recruiting type issues, as well as the other personnel type issues. The focus will be on trends in law enforcement and ensuring our departmental policies and procedures are consistent with the desires of the community we serve. And to get into the details just a little bit, we're thinking the committee will be comprised of 5 community members appointed by me, and we feel like 5 is probably a good number, and certainly it could be that we learn as we move forward that there is some other number that would work better, but 5 seems to be a good starting point. We want the citizens on the board to be a resident or at least have a strong connection to the Williamsburg community. Maybe they're a business owner, maybe they're some other connection. What we really want is a representative from our local NAACP office, as well as our business community and our faith-based community, in addition to 2 other citizens. And our thoughts are that the initial meetings will be similar to a Citizens Police Academy. It's one thing to talk about policing issues as maybe what you're seeing on TV, but I feel strongly that any community member that really is going to help us advance to the next level really needs to have a thorough understanding of where we're starting from, and what mechanisms we have in place as it relates to accountability, how our body-worn cameras work, how our force applications are reviewed and monitored, and all those types of things that we're currently doing to hold our officers accountable and to be the best department that we can for our citizens. So we're hoping that with the Citizens Academy type concept, we're really hoping that's something that we haven't done here. We think that alone will afford us the opportunity to build something that as we move forward, we can use that concept to actually have a Citizens Academy where more of our citizens can come in and learn about the police department. We're also hoping that we have citizens who are willing to do a ride along, so they actually have an opportunity to, from the bird's eye perspective, if you will, from the police officer, to do a ride along and really see kind of what it's like to be out there. Our plan is to meet quarterly, and of course, at these meetings, we'll talk about crime and the crime trends. I mean, the most important thing the police department does is keep our community safe. And so anything we do has to keep our community safe, but also with regard to the highest level of respect that we can afford our citizens. But we also want to update our panel, our committee on personnel updates. If it were desired. So I promised to be brief. So with that, I'm certainly open to questions.
Thank you, Chief Dunn. I just want to let everybody know that the chief and the city manager and I sat down and kind of reviewed this in advance of bringing it forward to council. My initial takeaway was that this really is a great step in a direction that involves the community with our police department in a way that is productive. I think, as wonderful as men and women are of our police department, there's always opportunity for improvement. And I think it's clear from Chief Dunn that he welcomes that opportunity for that community input. And I think the structure that we've kind of laid out in his plan here allows for a cross section of our community to participate. But then beyond that, this new committee can help develop ways for more members of the community to come in and better understand, using the opportunity for a ride along, to allow our community to understand what's really happening out there every day in our community. A lot of people won't be surprised. Some people might be surprised. I think we have a really safe community, but there's things out there that people really ought to see. And I think more importantly, it's really going to give people the opportunity to see how good our officers are. So I think what the chief has presented here is a great first step. I look forward to hearing from members of council as to any thoughts that they may have, so that hopefully by March meeting, we'll be able to kind of hear the final draft of what the chief has proposed, so that we can implement this and get this into action. I think our community has been looking forward to having something like this. I think they have been looking forward to knowing that we're taking these steps to help the community understand what's going on in the police department and give them the opportunity to provide feedback. And so I think that's important. One thing that I did want to point out, Chief, if I could, I do think as we pick these 5 members, just to offer a little bit additional balance as to who approves them, that the city manager and I, as the mayor, have the opportunity to weigh in on who those 5 are before they're finally approved. I think that would give the department a little bit of cover, that they're not just putting in people that they want to see, and then allows the community to understand that there's been some additional eyes looking at those candidates. I'd like to make sure we add that to it. Other than that, I'll turn it over to Vice Mayor Dent for any questions or thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thanks, Chief, for the presentation. And I agree that this is a great initial first step. And in researching this, there's as you know from all your years in law enforcement, there's various forms of how communities are addressing some of these issues, and there's a lot of criticisms, there's a lot of compliments, but specifically a lot of the criticism comes with the boards that are involved in disciplinary actions or recommending disciplinary actions to the chief. And then if the chief doesn't follow those recommendations, he's criticized for it. So I guess how do you think that, what was really the initial thing that made you feel this was the right fit for Williamsburg and what we're doing? Because I agree, I believe it's the right fit, but from a law enforcement perspective, and you highlighted some of the things of building community trust and getting the community involved. What kind of makes this model fit for Williamsburg?
Well, first off, I think that we want it to be nimble, and so if we bring in our citizens, and as we start evaluating and kind of looking at things, and if that group feels like maybe we need to go in a different direction, then we're open to doing that. And so I think that, again, when I say that this is a starting point, I really mean that. This is a starting point that I hope will evolve as it moves forward. But I also feel like, I could talk about all the different things that we're doing, like being a CLIA accredited agency, whereby annually we're inspected, and in fact, every so number of years, we actually have long showing that our policies are first off in order and our best practices, and that we are actually doing what we say we're doing, so that we don't have a situation where we have policies on the books, but the practice looks very different. We couldn't be a CALIA accredited agency, and that really is the gold standard in law enforcement. And in fact, as you may know, this year, as the calls for reform came out, many of those reform-minded policies and practices, if you will, we had already adopted. And it didn't take a tragic incident like the George Floyd situation for us to do that. Been here 3.5 years, and for 3.5 years, I've been, really preaching at every opportunity community policing and the importance of community policing. And I think this year has really, demonstrated why that is so important, why it is so important for us to have an opportunity to hear our citizens, to engage with our citizens, to build those relationships with our citizens. And I mean, every neighborhood throughout the city. And so I think that in a lot of ways, we are leap years ahead of many of our peers. And again, to one more reason that I think that this is probably where we need to be. And then I think, there's this big push, and from a very small number of the citizens in our community, to have a citizen review type board versus a chief's advisory type board. And, I certainly think that there are departments that have such an issue with trust with their department and their community, or maybe they've had, decades of issues. And I think that those types of situations, maybe that sort of civilian review board would make a whole lot more sense. But for Williamsburg, in fact, I mean, I'm really proud that I can say this, with the small number of complaints that we receive each year, and then the fact that if there is a complaint that is merited and it was inappropriate, and we choose to hold that officer accountable, I don't make that decision. I don't make that determination. That doesn't happen in a vacuum here. Prior to any sort of serious discipline or anything like that, I'm going to consult, of course, with the city manager as well as the city attorney. So folks who are outside of the police department. So, I mean, there are just so many ways I think that we're already, ensuring that we're really putting our best foot forward. And I feel like, I really feel like it's hard to imagine that a group of citizens that have never served as a police officer would know exactly what decision needed to be made in a situation where an officer makes a split-second decision that may have been the right decision or it may have been the wrong decision. I really feel like having a committee that really takes that on for themselves and then tells me in the chain of command how that needs to be handled. I just see that as being very problematic. And again, if it's a very problematic department, maybe that would be more necessary and more appropriate. And then maybe again, as we bring in this group of citizens who I hope will be a cross section of our community, as we move forward, maybe we will learn that maybe my perspective changes, as we go forward. And I'm certainly going to be open to that. And so I hope that you guys, would agree that as the leader of your police department, of this community's police department, I try to be very open and very engaged with our citizens. And certainly, if you or anybody else in our community has some idea for us doing things differently or better, I'm all ears. I want to hear about it. And so I think this is just a more formal opportunity of us doing that and providing us a mechanism. And I think right now there's so much attention across the country and beyond, really, but on law enforcement. I really do. I think it's an ideal time for us to capture people who really will be committed to helping us to make this police department the best police department we can be. I hope that answered your question, and I sure didn't mean to be so long.
No, you did. And actually you brought up some of the points that I was hoping you would bring up, in the fact that your department, this department in Williamsburg, was far ahead of many of the issues and having policies in place already prior to all of the unrest that had taken place. So it was great to point that out. And I too agree with the mayor in that only because in reading what's been happening in other localities, there's often a perception that the people selected to these committees are pro law enforcement. So you're not going to get a true input. So again, not that that's your intent, but just to shield you from that, to have some others consider who those members are that selected. And then just one other quick question is, I didn't know, do you envision, not that it has to be that formal, but that these members would have some type of term limit like other boards or commissions, so you could rotate?
We do, and I've got a pretty thorough policy on that, and I believe we're looking at a 2-year terms, and then I think you can repeat that once, and we're going to have to kind of work it in so that not everyone comes on and goes off at the exact same time. But yeah, we've definitely thought that through.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. I agree with you in terms of the Citizen Academy is really a great eye-opener. I was fortunate to participate with James City County several years ago, one of the major police departments in the Pacific Northwest, and being able to put yourself in the shoes of a police officer that has to make a split-second decision at night with limited visibility in terms of what's being pointed at you, I think is really a strong education there. Also, following up on what you were talking about, it's really important, I think, that we as a community recognize the police department's ongoing community outreach initiatives, including assigning police officers to schools, to neighborhoods, to businesses. We know at the last in-person annual night out, we had over 500 people participating in that with us. And then you mentioned Kalia, 2 years ago, the board that was doing the thing, they actually hold a public hearing and invite all the citizens to come in and voice any complaints and compliments that they have. And I was actually, there were no complaints at all, 0 complaints in the public hearing. And then year outside our capital, the Colonial capital, the chief reaffirmed phase 2 covenant to work in collaboration and transparency to resolve injustice and racial disparities. I think that's another strong factor that we have going in our community. And then more recently, leading up to this, you've had discussion with social justice community members. So there's been a lot of input, I think, getting to this point. One of the recommendations I have, though, is if we could give a little latitude to the committee to establish overall goals. For example, maybe what can we do to foster a more understanding of how the police department can enhance how it provides fair and equitable service to all? That might be one of the goals to look at. How do we enhance transparency, accountability, and follow policies and procedures which reflect community shared values, I think is important. And I agree with the mayor, it's because we saw the legislation that was going forward in the state level about these citizen review committees, and there was a real intent there to link to an elected official. And I think if you have the mayor and the city manager part of that process for appointing the members, I think that'll really help there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Barbara?
Thank you for the presentation, Chief Dunn. And I agree that in favor of an advisory as opposed to review committee. So I'm glad you've taken it in that direction. I just have 2 quick questions. So assuming that presentation is made next month and you start putting together the committee, when do you hope to stand up the committee for its first meeting? Maybe I should back up to the other question. As far as committee members, are you looking to just put the word out and have people apply, or go directly to, say, the NAACP and ask them to recommend a member to be on the committee? What's your thought process on that?
Yeah, great questions. Well, I'm hoping to broadly put out that we are accepting applications for it, but I want to give it a couple months. I want the pandemic to get to the point so that once we've made some selections, we can start rolling. I don't want it to be one of those things where, there's all this, and then it takes 6 months before we really have our first meeting or anything like that. So once folks apply and they're selected, then I want us to be able to really gear up and start moving forward. So I'm thinking probably in a couple of months, we'll be in a position with the pandemic where we'll feel comfortable putting that application out. And so we are going to just broadly put it out and hope that we get, folks that would be well suited for it. But there are certainly groups, and you've alluded to one. I touched on it in the presentation. The NAACP, I think, is a real important partner in this, and I think they'll have a real interest. And I think that they certainly represent a constituency that we want to ensure that their voice is at our table. And so there's a new NAACP president. I had a wonderful working relationship with Mr. Smalls, the previous president. But the new president has already reached out to me, and I have no doubt that we'll continue that wonderful relationship. And my plan is to invite him to select or to open up to his membership who might be needed. And I feel like the leadership of the NAACP probably would be best positioned to tell us who they would like for their rep to serve on this committee. So excellent questions. I hope that covered them.
It did. Thank you.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for joining us today, Chief Dunn. I've always really admired in your 3.5 years here in the city exactly how much outreach you do and how specifically you seek it out. I think that has been one of the benefits of seeing this citizen advisory panel come together or committee in Williamsburg is sometimes in other localities, the public and the law enforcement can have more of an adversarial relationship. When you and I have worked together on engaging the school, I know you've done record-breaking fundraisers with the NAACP, and obviously you started the NRO, Neighborhood Resource Officer Program. So you're trying to get out there so much, and I really admire that. I think the committee will be successful because of that. So I did have a couple of recommendations. The first was just a comment. I think the content of what you're planning on focusing is a great one. There's really two goals as I see it. It's the education of the public of what you do, but also the opportunity to learn from the public about areas where they think there could be additional programs started or more outreach from the department. So the ideas like a ride along and then the dispersed recruitment are wonderful ones. I wanted to echo what Mayor Pons said about just having a couple more eyes on the recruitment. I think that does provide some cover. I have full faith that you will bring together a good group of people to advise you, but I would certainly recommend that as another way to have a couple others review it. The first of my 2 points was on the frequency of the meetings. I think once a quarter is a good goal to set, as it will be an ongoing committee, but because this is coming out a bit reactionary from all of the events of last summer, which we are still very much experiencing right now, I might recommend that the first year of the committee, or maybe the first cohort of committee members that you have come through, meets with a bit more frequency than once per quarter. I don't think it needs to be once a week, but once every 2 months, or maybe even once a month if you thought it possible. I've served on boards that are once a quarter, and I always find myself having to figure out again what we were talking about months back and needing to get back involved with some of the decisions that we had on our horizon, because I think these will probably provide you with opportunities to educate the public and opportunities to learn yourself on ways to engage other constituencies. Having a bit more of a frequency of these meetings at the onset would be helpful. That was point one. And then my second and final, similar to what Councilman Ramsey was saying, is just the recruitment of the committee, making sure that it's from a diverse group of people that you're able to hear from. Particularly, I would look into geographic areas of the city where that neighborhood resource officer program has not had such a close relationship, so that you're making sure as time goes on that you can benefit from trying to build from that.
Yeah, excellent points. I appreciate that. And yeah, certainly when we get started, you're right. I mean, if you think of the concept of a citizens police academy, if we were to do that quarterly, it would be 3 years from now before we probably got through that. So I definitely envision early on, it's going to be a lot more of a time commitment from the citizens and of course from the police department as well. But so we're definitely going to need folks who are willing to put forth some real time early on, and then as we get going, again, my vision is that this is, we're kind of framing it at this point, but as we move forward, my vision is that this committee will help us shape it so that we evolve to really position it so that we really are meeting the needs of the community. And so, yeah, I mean, excellent points, and I definitely well appreciate that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for approaching this idea not as something to check a box, but really something that could advise the department in how it operates in the future. So very much appreciate all your outreach, and those are my points. Thank you, Chief Dunn.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everybody. So moving forward, I don't know that we contributed substantively to make big alterations to what you've planned. I know that the city manager pointed out that this could come back in March as an agenda item for further discussion. Is that something that we feel that we need to do, or should we feel comfortable proceeding now? Mr. Tribbitt, is there something I'm missing in all that?
No, sir. If the council feels like you've had a good overview of it and you'd like the department to proceed as quickly as possible, then there's no need certainly to bring it back in March. We could go ahead and finalize the documents, and the chief could put it in place and begin the process of standing up the panel.
Yeah, I'm certainly comfortable not delaying it any longer. I trust Chief Dunn and his staff to put the policies in place and get it moving forward.
Good. Well, that would be my recommendation, unless somebody else has some objections.
That's good for me.
Yeah, agree with that as well. I think doing it rapid is better, as long as the recommendations were all heard today, and I'm sure they were.
Yeah, and so let's do that, and we all understand that as this evolves and grows, and the chief understands the needs to be different than what they are today in the future, then we can make those alterations. So I would encourage staff to go ahead and proceed, and let's get this advisory council committee going so that we can fulfill the kind of the quest of this. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Kind words from everyone. Thank you.
Certainly welcome. Ms. Shelton, anything from you?
Not on this point on the agenda. I think I have the next one.
You do. So it takes us to unfinished business, consideration and authorization for the city manager to execute an interim agreement for the demolition and construction of the fire station. Now you can go.
So last month, City Council voted to move forward with David Nice Builders, Inc., one of the proposers for the fire station. And the next step in the process is to approve an interim agreement. The purpose of the interim agreement is to basically pay the design team and the contractor for the work that they do while they're designing the building. The document provides for that. The cost for this part of the agreement is $391,054. The specific work is shown in Attachment D to the agreement that they're going to do during interim phase on a schedule that's Attachment E, which has been revised, and I sent you that revision right before the council meeting. They will work to 35% completion of the documents, and at that point they should be able to give council the final cost, which would be the guaranteed maximum price in the comprehensive agreement that gives staff the opportunity to review all of those schedules and make sure that that price is consistent with what the fire station needs. That should happen sometime in the April timeframe pursuant to the revised Schedule E. It's April 21st that we should have those documents at a sufficient point where we can move forward with the comprehensive agreement. However, the interim agreement does not bind City Council to move forward with the comprehensive agreement. This is a standalone agreement for this work. And so I can answer any questions that you have about the agreement. It's a pretty standard agreement. They're required to provide insurance. They're required to do the work and provide warranties for that work according to the agreement documents. So I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Shelton. Any questions, Vice Mayor Dent?
No questions from me. We're ready to move forward.
Oh,
Mr. Haslam, yes, sir.
yeah, one question, then maybe a recommendation for Drew. Do the deliverable we're seeing in this interim agreement, is it anticipated that that would include approval from the Architectural Review Board? Or is that-
Yeah, so attachment E, they're taking the design to the ARB.
Okay, that's good. And then the second thing is, we know that the schedule we saw was a typical design schedule. So based on, okay, Drew gives them the contract for the whole project and they get going. Know that there are going to be times when owner review, in fact, after the deliverables come in after 35%, there'll be time to discuss with City Council for you to negotiate the final agreement. I did not see the owner review times in the schedule, and I think maybe in discussing with the team that one of the deliverables for this 35% effort could be that type of schedule. Does that make sense?
For the comprehensive agreement.
Yeah. So that we recognize that there are times when it's got to review schedules before they go to the next step.
Right. Well, so my expectation is that the schedule is not going to look the same for the comprehensive agreement as this one does, because at this point there are still some unknowns and there are studies that need to be done in terms of hazmat and soil samples that haven't been done yet, that are going to be done as part of the interim agreement, and so that may alter some of what you're looking at now.
And also, once we get the 35%, there'll be time that we have to look at it before you get them going on the full agreement. And
that's
then
right. And I think
at the end of certain points where they've got things, you want that review time. So I just don't want anybody to lock in on that December date as we're going to have a new facility then necessarily.
Right, and I think the staff's anticipation is that we're going to have enough to be able to start drafting the comprehensive agreement in May. We may not be completed with the schedules in May, and the objective is still to have this in front of City Council in June.
Okay.
Ms. Ramsey, any questions?
No questions from me. Thank you.
Nothing from Mr. Rogers? Good. Well, I look forward to moving forward with this. Would anybody like to make a motion?
So I move that City Council authorizes city manager to execute the interim agreement for Fire Station Number 1 with David Nice Building dated February 11, 2021.
Second.
Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Pons,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent,
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. That takes us to new business. We have a report budget amendment for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021, proposed resolution number 21-02. Ms. Dameron.
Yes, Resolution 21-2 seeks the appropriation of grant funds that the city has received. The first grant is a Williamsburg Health Foundation grant for COVID-19 eviction prevention program that will be received in the general fund and passed through to the Public Assistance Fund for Human Services to manage that program. And the second one is a $92,028 utility grant or grant for municipal utility relief. We passed a similar ordinance or resolution in January that received that into the general fund. Now we're seeking to transfer those funds to the utility department. We have accepted applications for about $67,000 in relief to date. At the time that we received these, it was a very quick turnaround, and initially the funds were available for services consumed by the end of December 2020. That has now been extended. So we have about $25,000 left still available. The application is on our city website, also available in the lobby to the municipal building. And if you have any difficulty getting that, you can contact our utility billing department. Staff recommends approval of Resolution 21-2 so that we can expend the grant funds.
Thank you, Ms. Dameron. I don't have any questions, but I'm really excited that the Health Foundation has been able to, in total, put $1 million towards rent relief for residents in our area. And then I guess our portion of that is $270,000. So that is certainly very commendable on their part, and look forward to helping those people in greatest need. So Vice Mayor Dent, anything?
No questions.
Mr. Maslin, no questions. Ms. Ramsey?
No questions.
Mr. Rogers? Okay, is there a motion?
Yes, I will move that we accept approval of Resolution 21-02 as submitted.
Second?
Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Pons,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent,
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Thank you. So that takes us to item B under new business, consideration and approval of ordinance number 21-01, creating a public arts council, and resolution number 21-03, creating a public art program. Michelle DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'm going to share my screen. So what we're going to do today is go through what we discussed at the at last month's work session. And the proposal is for you to pass an ordinance that creates a public art council, and then a resolution that specifies what that arts council will do and what your public art program will look like and what the guidelines will be. So I will share my screen. So we're talking about the proposed public art program, and I will just remind the audience that this is an initiative in City Council's 2021 and 22 goals initiatives policy and packet. So the steps, as I said before, are to create a public art council, and you'll see in the middle of the screen talks about what that public art council will be authorized to do. They will be authorized to acquire art within a 10% of the public art fund each year. They also will be authorized to accept and deaccession public art, and they will also be authorized to develop and implement a public art plan. And so the details of this art council is we're proposing it be 9 members. 2 of those would be city council members, 2 would be community-wide appointees by the city council, and then 1 member each from the ARB, the Planning Commission, the Tourism Grant Review Committee, the EDA, and the city membership of the Williamsburg Area Arts Commission. And as we discussed in the past, this is to streamline the process so that applications do not find their way having to go to each of these bodies individually, but they can come together, as well as having all these people together to discuss them brings a synergy and a wisdom to the process. The funding request is to fund this at 1% of the CIP of your annual CIP budget. Of course, this is subject to annual appropriation by council each year. This is just the goal that's listed in these documents. And that we established the fund this first year with a one-time allocation of $165,000 from the COVID-19 Tourism Resiliency Funds. As I mentioned before, the Public Art Council is authorized to spend 10% of whatever's in their fund within 1 year, 1 fiscal year. Anything above that would require city council approval. And the unused funds would carry forward each year. So when we talk about what is public art and what does that mean in the city of Williamsburg, these are outlined in the resolution before you, that it would celebrate the beauty, history, character, and aspirations of the city, that it would be appropriate and appealing for all, including children. It's not intended to be commercial signage. We had a lot of discussions about this. So a mural or a sculpture cannot be the logo or the specific name of a business, but we do realize that public art may want to reflect the commercial uses going on in that area, the character of that area. You'll recall we looked at an example in Charlottesville where they had done an Andy Warhol motif with old-fashioned cameras at a camera shop. So it didn't have the logo of the camera shop. It didn't have the name of the camera shop, but clearly the theme of there's camera activity going on here in the building. Also want it to be accessible to the public, not create a hazard. And it would be a permanent installation, not something that's paper or cardboard or cheap that's going to deteriorate over time. Then lastly, I wanted to point out that this proposal talks about murals just being allowed in the B3 Midtown zoning district as a pilot, as we learn more about this program and how murals work in our community. And so what your Public Art Council will do is engage the public, talk about the purpose of public art in Williamsburg. Where should the public art be located? Are there themes that are appropriate to Williamsburg? We've looked at what other communities have done. They typically hire an expensive consultant to do this. We feel like this can be done by your Public Art Council, of course, following models of best practices that have happened in the state and with staff as well. And so the process, once everything's in place, is that the applications would come to the development specialist in the Economic Development Department. There'd be an initial review by staff and by the chairperson of the Public Art Council to see if it's appropriate, if it's hit guidelines that council has set out. And then it would go to the Architecture Review Board for what is called a courtesy review. So this is not a yes or no or a veto. This is the ARB looking at the public art and paying particular attention to how it might affect exterior architectural character or environmental features within an ARB district. And then they would send that information to staff, who would then take the application and the courtesy review comments from the ARB to the Public Art Council, who then could take action as long as it's within that 10% of the public art fund that's available that year. Anything that costs more than that, they'd be required to come to City Council. But as I noted on the first slide, they will be able to accept donations and things that do not cost funds. They will play that role for City Council. And then lastly, if you adopt both of these, the ordinance and the resolution, the next steps would be that you would appoint the Public Art Council. The staff would take an inventory of existing public art, working with that new PAC, the Public Art Council. We'd get public input and develop a public art plan and develop an application process and be off and running on the public art program. And I will stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Witt. This is something that we've been talking about getting underway for some time, and I think what you've presented today is certainly a fair representation of everything that I've heard through all the boards and commissions and conversations on various different councils over the years of getting this to the point where eventually we can have more public art in places. And we've talked about the challenges of who gets to pick and all that stuff. And I think you've identified the process that is fair. The establishment of the council that as it's been laid out is a great segment of all of the boards and commissions. So we'll have the representation from the entities that we as a council count on for, to vet issues to make sure that we're heading in the right direction, whether it's ARB, EDA, Planning Commission, all of these committees will be represented and have an opportunity to weigh in on whatever comes forward as an arts project. So I applaud the efforts to get us here today and look forward to supporting this. Vice Mayor Dent?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And, we discussed in our previous meeting when the initial presentation about how important the arts are to the culture of Williamsburg and continuing to do things that will draw tourism to Williamsburg and bring people back. And so I really think this is a great step. And there have been a lot of discussions about who decides what that art's going to be. So this council would be a perfect way to put a committee in place that can make that selection. One thing, Mr. Trivett, I was wondering, could you just highlight real quickly, again, for those watching the GIO process, so that because there've been some questions about in a trying time of, COVID-19 and the impact it's had on all of our finances. But really the point that there was a lot of public input at this GIO process that desires this type of art for Williamsburg.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely, Vice Mayor. So when we worked through our GIO retreat, in preparation of that, we did a survey, asked some questions so we could get good public input. We had the highest amount of public input that we've had in the GIO process in years using that online survey. So I think we can move forward with confidence that that public art program is something that the majority of our citizens support. The question of whether or not now is a good time to fund public art is a good question. And, I don't know that there's an answer I can say unequivocally is right or wrong. I can only tell you that from the staff's perspective, making this investment is about resiliency. It's about implementing something that helps boost our tourism economy. Do I think that this initial investment will be something that causes people all over the country to say, oh, I want to go to Williamsburg to see that public art program? Probably not. But what we do know is that in communities that have a robust public art program, the visitors come away saying the public art is a reason that they might come back. The public art is a reason that they might recommend that their neighbor also go and visit that locality. So I think that this investment is really about resiliency and future proofing. It's one of those things that we can invest in over time. $165,000 seems like a lot of money, but the way that we're establishing this council is they have access to 10% without council approval. That way, no one year are we going to see a massive expenditure that the council doesn't get to decide on. So even though we may allocate the $165,000 into the CIP for this purpose, the council may or may not access that in the first year. And if we get to the FY22, FY23 budgets and desperately need that source of funding, we can go back to it if we needed to. I think that as we have our budget retreat, we are going to talk a lot about revenue shortfalls. We had the finance report earlier today, and while the report is better than we expected it to be, it's still not good. And there are a lot of things in our budget that we're going to have a struggle funding. So what we're trying to do is, with this amount of money that we have carved out, it's a one-time expenditure that really cannot help us with recurring expenses in the future. So I personally, and I think that the CFO agrees, feel like this is a good step. And as I said, just because we're putting it in the CIP for public art does not mean that we've lost access to it if we needed to use it for some other purpose.
Thank you. Those are great points. And I agree that, even though COVID's caused a lot of things to stand still, we can't stand still at everything and not reinvest in the community.
Great point. Maslin, yes, sir.
Thanks, Michelle. One question on the resolution in terms of we're defining membership. It's WP members, residents of the city, or own a business or represent an arts nonprofit located in the city of Williamsburg. One of my suggestions had been to make sure we consider members that may be part of William and Mary and their arts program. And I assume that the third provision there would allow someone from William and Mary to be part of it. I think we restrict ourselves too much when we say business owners, because there are a lot of people out there contributing from businesses that may not own the business. And I was just wondering if we could reword it to say members must be residents of the city or represent a business in the city or arts nonprofit located in the city, something like that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the owner. It could be, just like we're saying, a representative of a nonprofit, it could be a representative of a business in the city.
At council's discretion, that's certainly possible, yes.
I'm not opposed to that. Yeah, I think we can reword that. I mean, there's probably lots of people that at a large employer like Colonial Williamsburg, who would, contribute widely to something like this. So maybe we can amend that, something similar to what Ted had said. So say it again, Ted, if you don't mind.
So it says that WPAC members must be residents of the city or represent an arts nonprofit or business located in the city of Williamsburg.
So I think it would be changing the name, changing the word of own a business to represent a business.
Right, right.
I think is it that easy, Chris?
Does the business need to be in the city?
Yes.
I would say yes.
Okay,
That's why I was saying that business or nonprofit in the city.
okay. It is that easy, but you will need to make that amendment in both the ordinance and the resolution.
And that can be done in your motion, I presume.
Barb, you getting that?
I am.
Okay. Mr. Rogers, did you have any input?
I had a couple things.
I'm sorry,
say
I skipped right
go
over.
over me.
Ramsey first.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay. I even made some notes because this is something that I'm very interested in, both as
Sorry about that.
that's okay. And I just wanted to follow up on a little bit of what Drew said and Vice Mayor Dent as far as how much arts can play a part into the city's economic impact. And I did just a little bit of research. And for me, there's one entity that sort of really spoke how much public art can make a difference, and that's the Cloud Gate in Chicago, or commonly called the Bean. And I read that it's now the most visited park and site in the Midwest, and close to 13 million people in the second half of 2016 visited that park, and specifically to search out that sculpture. And closer to home, we also can look at the Renaissance in Richmond with their museums, the various high profile exhibits they've had there, the amount of murals they had. They even have a book just on murals in Richmond. And all of that, I think, has really helped revitalize their arts, their food and beverage scene. And it also, arts can play a magnet for talent, because that's something that young people particularly look for. They look for quality of life and a little bit more variety. And in a 2018 article from Virginia Business, it stated that arts patrons to Virginia spend 34 cents more per dollar on arts-related tourism than average tourists. And nationally, arts and cultural economic activity accounted for about $763 billion in 2015. So, as say, it not only adds to a quality of life, but it's also can be big business. So I think investing $165,000 initially will give us a good return on a variety of things. So obviously, I'm very much endorsing the resolution and the policy.
Thank you, Ms. Ramsey. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Director DeWitt, for the presentation and for putting this together. One question, the point that says murals in B3 Midtown, that then restricts murals within B3 Midtown so that an applying party could not apply for other parts of the city.
Correct. It allows murals only in that part of the city, in the B3 zoning district, which is Midtown.
Okay. I know that's something that's new from what, at least I think it's new from what we reviewed in January. And I think that we could expand that outside of just the Midtown area, which is not to say to council and to anyone listening that the entire city would be filled with murals soon, but we are actively developing in other parts of the city. I don't think to restrict murals, now having heard from Councilwoman Ramsey and from your presentation how they can be drivers of tourism into just that Midtown area, I think we should let the committee, the Public Arts Committee, decide on where those could go and allowing them in a broader use than just that Midtown area. Maybe we restrict from something like the historic district, but I think we should allow applicants to come in and through their expertise and artistic ability say, this area of city could be really great for your mural, whether that's Capitol Landing Road or Richmond Road, and then let the actual Arts Commission decide if that is truly the case.
Well, so if I can jump in there, I think once we have this council established, I would expect that they would come back with some recommendations, and that may be something that they address. Because I think to your point about expanding it, I too feel like there are other areas in the city that could easily handle a mural without causing too much interruption to the historic area or certain important areas of the city. But I would like to hear maybe a recommendation from this council as to let them evaluate where some murals could go.
Well, I might say to that, Mayor, it sounds like you agree. We could recommend right now to open it up. And then if the council comes back to say, maybe we disagree, then they can allow that. But if there are other areas of the city which could hold a mural.
Well, so no, you misunderstood me. I don't want to make the determination today where they should or shouldn't go outside of Midtown Row. But more succinctly, I'll say I'd like to hear back from them once they've convened and had the opportunity to have a discussion amongst themselves where they think it should go.
And I just wanted to remind Caleb and Pat that we had a discussion about murals I think it was last fall, and there was a lot of, I guess, topics brought up about where and when for murals, and I'm interested in seeing murals in a broader area, but I think to start in Midtown is a good place for Williamsburg, and then try to see how it's accepted by the community and look to go out a little bit further. I think would be a good initial step for our public art program.
A question. So I wasn't on council when the Arts District was established, but I thought we talked about that would be a logical starting. If you got an Arts District, why wouldn't you allow murals there?
Well,
I don't think I would say is like a lot of those places in the Arts District are owned by a lot of different owners.
And that wasn't really the focus of the Arts District. The focus of the Arts District was to try to help arts-related businesses locate in the Arts District. And I don't remember there being any discussion about murals. I may be misremembering, Michelle, but I don't remember we had any discussion about murals at that point.
No, not around the adoption of the Arts District incentives. It was, that area had a very high commercial vacancy rate at the time. And we pinpointed the creative economy, arts related businesses as something that could fill those vacancies and allow people to live and work, if they are artists, to live and work in the same building. Certainly murals have been discussed over the years, as Councilwoman Ramsey pointed out. I think it may have been last winter when the council first started talking about this. It was a concern of some of the public about murals and what they would look like and how they would affect the character of the city. So that's why staff recommends today that we start as a pilot program in Midtown. We know Midtown's interested in doing one. They have a very flat brick wall that seems appropriate to consider it, and test it and see how it goes.
Well, that works with me. I mean, I'll retract it. I would hope that the committee comes back to say murals should be expanded. You know, when I think of it, the Welcome to Stanton sign that we saw on this presentation, that's not going to be in the exact center where no one can find it. That's likely on one of their entry corridors. So I think will come the day where we expand outwards in what's allowed to have a mural, but understand that there's a necessity to have a pilot project with things like this. And certainly Midtown will do the project right.
And I will just point out, if you'll humor me, Mr. Mayor, that Williamsburg is very unique in the cities, and Williamsburg 19th century architecture that was old houses and those brick buildings. You know, we have great 1700s, and then we have the 21st century, but we really lost that sort of industrial character where you saw murals happen naturally over time, right? So you saw the big Coca-Cola murals in downtown, and we don't have that architecture left because we have the restored area instead. So I think that made people a little nervous as well. But I hear your point, and I think one of the first things the Public Art Council should do is have this discussion and get more public input about it.
Sounds good.
I would note that currently murals are not allowed anywhere in the city under the zoning ordinance. And so one of the things you're going to see then is a change in the zoning ordinance that allows them in the Midtown District.
Good. So are there any other comments or questions for Michelle regarding the Public Arts Council? So Barbara, you ready to make a motion which includes an amendment to committee?
I will try. So I move that City Council adopt Ordinance 21-01 to create a Public Art Council and Resolution 21-03 to create a Public Art Program as presented by staff, except that members must be residents of the city or represent a business or arts nonprofit located in the city of Williamsburg.
Second.
Oh, there you go. Okay, Ms. Felico.
Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Pons,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent,
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Thank you. So that takes us to item 7 on their agenda, the open forum portion of the meeting. Mr. Barham, is there anybody on hold that would like to speak?
So there is not.
Okay, hearing none, we'll close the open forum. And I don't believe, Mr. Vice Mayor, we have any items for closed session.
We do not.
Good. Okay. Who wants to handle item 9 on the agenda?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Felico.
Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Pons,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent,
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate all your hard work.
Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good week.